Can't elaborate, but what I can say is that the United States is committed to utilizing the full extent of its capabilities to monitor the Gaddafi regime's behavior, to ensure that evidence is gathered of further violence or atrocities committed against the Libyan people. Yes, Dan.
Now, I know that the administration, the president in particular, has been hesitant to mention Gaddafi's name. There was a lot of concern about Americans still on the ground, potentially being held hostage. So now that it appears that most of the Americans who wanted to get out have gotten out, can we expect stronger language now from the president, perhaps calling him out by name?
Well, I don't want to put words in the president's mouth for the next time he speaks, but I think you've heard me use some pretty strong language against Colonel Gaddafi. And
we haven't heard that from the president himself.
Dan, I think I expressed when I came out here that there has been a clear reason for the way we have handled ourselves this week. The airplane that carried American citizens, the remaining American citizens that we wanted to get evacuated from Libya, was wheels up less than an hour ago. So I would just say that your analysis of the situation is fairly accurate, and it's been all of a half an hour or so since those American citizens were in flight towards Istanbul.
So much has been asked already about this leader who really is unpredictable in terms of what he's going to do.
Live coverage on Al Jazeera of a White House media briefing with Jay Carney. Just want to show you what's happening on the right of the screen there. Valletta in Malta. That is a US-chartered ferry carrying more than 300 evacuees from Libya. It has arrived in Malta. Hit by some rough weather, apparently, but did manage to get out of Tripoli and aboard 300 passengers, of whom more than half are US citizens, is what PJ Crowley, the State Department spokesman, has said. 285 evacuees initially boarded the ferry, but the number rose to 300 when additional passengers were added, basically telling us a lot of people, obviously, wanting to get out of Tripoli. They got on to that ferry, a chartered US ferry. They are now arriving in Malta. We will talk more about that later. Right now, though, back to that media briefing at the White House. Jay Carney.
Protects American citizens, reflects our fundamental belief that the people of Libya deserve a government that treats them well, doesn't kill them indiscriminately, that is responsive to their needs and reflects their aspirations and allows them to participate in a democratic process. We can also take actions that some of which I've discussed from here, and specifics of some of the specifics of which you will hear later, that we believe can put more pressure on the Libyan regime, can hold it accountable, can isolate it, in order to get it to change its behavior. Chip.
Jay, do we expect to hear from the president on this at some point?
I don't have any announcements about the next time the president will address this.
What exactly is he doing? Is he going to be making more calls? What is his role in the coming days as this all implemented?
I think I read out to you the series of calls to foreign leaders specifically on this issue that he has made. I'm sure there will be more going forward. He's obviously constantly being briefed by his national security team, Tom Donnellan, the national security advisor. There was a principals committee meeting that lasted 2 hours or so in the Situation Room earlier today that ended not that long ago. Again, one of the reasons why I wanted to wait for that to end before I came out here. His participation is robust.
Sanctions take a while not only to feel the effect, but also to take effect. What is the timeline here for these sanctions to actually go into effect, and then for them actually to?
The mechanics of the sanctions, which actually haven't been finalized, I'll leave to others to describe once they've been finalized. But understand that as we reviewed the options available to us, we had a great interest in pursuing those that could be implemented quickly. And again, without putting specific timelines on implementation, some of the things that we're considering doing are the things that we can move most quickly on.
When you say quickly, and I know you can't put a specific timeline, or what are we talking, days, or are we talking weeks?
Again, there are a range of things that we're able to do. The specifics you'll be hearing about in the near future, and there are timelines about.
So that's a White House media briefing from Jay Carney, Press Secretary. They're talking about the next steps that the United States is looking at taking. It involves sanctions. He will not go into detail. Reporters have really tried to draw him on the details. He's not giving anything away yet. He did talk about the US being involved with Security Council discussions on a weapons embargo, asset freezes, sanctions on Libyan individuals. Talk about that in a moment. Just very quickly, just while we're on the split screen, just explain why we're looking at the right-hand side of the screen as well. That is a US chartered catamaran arriving in Malta with evacuees from Tripoli. That's why we've had the split screen up there for a while, just to explain 300 evacuees brought out from Tripoli on Friday. They've made it through some bad weather and finally got to Malta, where people are being evacuated to. So that is the letter. Let's deal with what's been happening at the White House and talk to Patty Culhane, who is our White House correspondent. Patty obviously doesn't want to be drawn on exactly what these sanctions are, but I thought it was interesting when Jay Carney said there has never been a time when this much has been done this quickly.
Well, and there was an editorial today that told the Obama administration, it was in the New York Times, it's the Bible over there at the White House. Basically, you said that after Kosovo, after Rwanda, this country said that it would not stand by for atrocities. The time to act is now. So if you look at it compared to those atrocities, it does seem that they are moving a bit faster. The thing that I think is striking and why it's important that you're looking at that on your screen, for about a week now, the administration's been pushed very hard from reporters and critics, saying, why is the U.S. being so quiet on Libya when there's so much violence and carnage and the stories are so horrific? How can the president stay silent, which he pretty much has, up until speaking about it on Wednesday, putting out a statement the Friday before, which he included other countries in, and they kept really trying to skirt the answer in public. In private, they were telling all of these reporters, look, we don't want to talk about it because we're terrified that Colonel Gaddafi is going to kidnap the Americans in Libya. Let us get them out before you push us too hard on this. So as you can see, the Americans, the civilians, and some of the diplomats are on that ferry on the screen. Others, we're told, flew out. And I think part of the reason why you're getting such vague answers from the White House as to the sanctions, I think they felt this criticism. I think they wanted to get out as soon as possible to say, look, we are taking action.
Patty, just pause with me for a moment. We'll have a listen. Our team here has managed to clip up some of what Jay Carney said during that media briefing. We'll talk in a moment.
Okay.
The President's tasking to the government to prepare options to hold the Libyan government accountable for its violation of human rights. We have decided to move forward with unilateral sanctions, which we are in the process of finalizing. Coordinated sanctions with our European allies and multilateral efforts to hold the Libyan government accountable through the United Nations. The President spoke today with Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey to coordinate our efforts to respond to developments in Libya and to ensure appropriate accountability. In his call with President Erdogan and his separate calls with President Sarkozy of France, Prime Minister Cameron of the United Kingdom, and Prime Minister Berlusconi of Italy yesterday, the President explained the unilateral measures that the United States is implementing and noted his desire to coordinate on measures that our allies are considering. He will continue these consultations to build international consensus for strong measures in the days to come.
Patty, international consensus continuing to build up in the days to come. What struck me with what we heard there from the White House press secretary, it's all about the team game here. The US isn't going to make any outlandish statements, any direct statements. It is going to do this, quote unquote, by the book.
Well, and it's interesting that the Obama administration is coming out after some other world leaders have called for sanctions and that sort of thing. But I think, really, truthfully, the most important thing that we just heard from Jay Carney, and it was sort of buried there, it wasn't one of the most obvious highlights, but he said that this is not the last thing we are prepared to do. The obvious implication there is some sort of military action. And then he was talking about U.S. intelligence, and I thought this was striking. He said that basically the full extent of our capabilities to monitor the behavior and be able to gather evidence of atrocities. Here's what that says, that they want to say, at least to the Libyan officials. With all of the vast technology that the intelligence community here in the U.S. has, we are going to train it on you. Basically, think about what it's in the arsenal. There are drones, there are satellites, there's electronic jamming capability. If the U.S. wanted to, it could very subtly jam all communications from the Libyan military. That's obviously something he's hinted at. What they are trying to do is not send a message to Colonel Gaddafi. People around Washington will say the U.S. has pretty much decided that he cannot be negotiated with, he can't be worked with. They think he's going to fight to the end. They aren't really even worried about him. They're focusing on the people around him. They are desperately trying to send a message to them with that particular statement that I just read to you. We are watching, and if you continue to follow Gaddafi, we will come after you.
That is Patty Culhane, our White House correspondent there, keeping an eye on that press briefing at the White House on the situation in Libya. Patty, thank you for that.
Okay.
Coming up the top of the hour here on Al Jazeera, we are watching this catamaran, which has just docked in Valletta, that is in Malta, is carrying, we're told, 300 evacuees from Tripoli. More than half, are US citizens, so says the State Department spokesman PJ Crowley. Only supposed to be 285 on board. It got kicked up to 300 when they took in some additional passengers. Obviously, people wanting to get out whichever way they can. People obviously leaving through the borders of Egypt and Tunisia, but also on this chartered ferry, US chartered ferry, which was brought in to remove people from Libya. And we are 2000 hours GMT now here on Al Jazeera. I'm Kamal Santa Maria with continuing live coverage of events in and around Libya, across the Middle East. A day of protest. In Libya, it turned into another extraordinary speech from Muammar Gaddafi, who spoke in Tripoli, and then places like Tobruk. These pictures which we got in about an hour or so ago of people celebrating the fact that they feel they are in control to a degree of Tobruk, that they have got rid of Muammar Gaddafi's control.